Well, access to social justice needs to be fast-tracked to benefit those who are desperate for help. Hundreds of thousands of young people, many with university degrees, are struggling to find employment as the economy struggles to grow, of course, meaningfully. Women living with disabilities still find themselves being discriminated against, and access to legal representation for those in need of justice remains nothing but a dream. This is the focus of the Hlanganisa Community Fund for Social and Gender Justice. Senior Manager Chiedza Chagutah joins me now to tell us more about this. Thank you so much, Chiedza, for joining us this afternoon. This is, of course, a major issue. Tell us about some of the struggles that women, especially, and youth as well, with these disabilities face, and how can we overcome this?
Thank you very much for having us this afternoon, and thank you to your viewers. So I think that the starting point for us as Hlanganisa is the ideals that are enshrined within the Constitution of South Africa, where there is an assumption that there is equality before the law, and that it's accessible, that the law and the formal justice system is accessible to every citizen in the country. And yet in reality, we see that that's not what is happening on the ground. And you've rightfully pointed out that one of the limitations or the barriers that are faced in accessing the justice system are around women with disabilities who, depending on what the disability is, are unable to access that justice because they are not actually considered reliable witnesses in a court of law. And I think that opens up a whole new conversation or multiple conversations around whether the law always equates to justice. And I think a lot of that is contended with really on the ground by organizations and structures that are working in underserved communities in trying to bridge that gap. And that gap, I guess, is facilitated and enabled by institutional failures within the justice system itself.
And let's talk about the high cost that's also, involved here of legal representation for women with disabilities especially.
I think the high cost of legal representation is not only does not only affect women with disabilities. I think that's a widespread challenge for many South Africans. We're just talking about challenges around youth accessing employment. I think the rates of unemployment, dictate what families are able to afford. And certainly when you're prioritizing as a household, sometimes legal representation is not really, a priority, because that's the reality in which people live. But I think it's quite unfortunate that for a system that that claims to want to enable justice for communities, and the high costs of hiring a lawyer just for consultation without even talking about, it's getting to court. I think it's quite, it's really, inaccessible for many communities.
And this is then
really struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah, no, very true. And this is, of course, where the role of community-based paralegals will come into effect, and how they, of course, can play this critical role in this situation, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the conversation actually also needs to go at looking at what are the other alternative justice mechanisms or justice systems or justice processes that can be explored, because we know that our courts are inundated. We know that the NPA, is already struggling with the number of cases that they need to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And community-based paralegals play a critical role in terms of facilitating for justice, but also being an entry point for communities who would otherwise not be able to engage or interface with the formal justice system. And I think a critical point to consider is the trust that community-based paralegals have from their communities. I think there's been growing distrust between communities and a lot of institutions. If we think about municipalities, I mean, it's not just the court system or the justice system. There's a lot of institutions, and communities just don't believe that these institutions have their interests, at heart. And so community-based paralegals play an important role to bridge that gap, that trust deficit between communities and the formal justice system.
Thank you so much for your insights there. That was Chiedza Chagutah. Of course, you're just talking to us about the access to social justice that needs to be fast-tracked to benefit those who are in desperate need of help.